What if the Incredibles never came out of hiding? What if Bob never dusted off his super suit and the world stayed convinced that heroes were a problem to be locked away? Today, we answer those very big, and some might even say, heroic questions. So would Syndrome's plan still have unfolded? Syndrome's plan was driven by his deep-seated resentment toward Mr. Incredible and superheroes in general. As a child, Buddy Pine idolized Mr. Incredible and aspired to be his sidekick, only to be harshly rejected. Imagine getting rejected by like Superman himself. That lives with a child. I would just cry myself to sleep every day. This rejection caused Buddy to grow bitter, leading him to build a fortune through technological innovations. So he's like Iron Man. That's a hero. His goal was to eliminate all superheroes and sell his technology to make everyone super, leveling the playing field by making superpowers accessible to all. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I would love some superpowers, so I don't think Syndrome's in the wrong right here. Now, killing superheroes, maybe that's something we talk about. But let's analyze what would have happened if the Parr family, in particular, the Incredibles, had stayed in hiding. Well, Syndrome's plan was already in motion. Even before the events of the movie, Syndrome had been hunting down and killing retired superheroes using his various iterations of the Omnidroid. These attacks were unrelated to the Parr family coming out of hiding. He was already operating under the objective to lure Mr. Incredible out of hiding, which means his ultimate plan would have happened regardless if the Parr family even came out, as Mr. Incredible's participation gave Syndrome crucial data to refine his Omnidroid, leading to its most dangerous version. However, if Mr. Incredible had resisted the temptation, Syndrome would have just continued perfecting his Omnidroid with other superheroes. This was all driven by Syndrome's motivation. Syndrome's ultimate goal was to release the Omnidroid on the city and then save the day by defeating it himself using a remote control. Whether or not the Parrs became active again, Syndrome would likely still have staged his fake heroism to become celebrated as the world's savior. Woo, Syndrome, yay! His ego and desire for revenge weren't dependent on the Parrs specifically coming out of hiding. It all stemmed from Mr. Incredible back in the day, so let's all just blame Mr. Incredible, because really it's just his fault. But based off all that data, yes, Syndrome's plan would have still unfolded. Even if the Incredibles had never came out of hiding, Syndrome had already killed multiple superheroes, and was in the final stages of executing his plan to become a hero himself. Mr. Incredible re-entering the fray accelerated certain aspects of what got Syndrome where he's at, but he wasn't the sole catalyst to the overall plan and schemes. But the other question I want to answer is, how would society deal with superheroes remaining permanently banned? Well, in the world of the Incredibles, superheroes were forced into hiding after the government passed the superhero relocation program. This was due to a series of lawsuits and public backlash over the collateral damage caused by superhero activity. At the beginning of the movie, the Parr family represents how superheroes adapted to life under these restrictions, leading normal, mundane lives, even though their powers remained intact. If the Parr family had stayed in hiding and the events of the movie never happened, several things could have played out regarding the society and the perception of superheroes. Syndrome's plan involved releasing the Omnidroid to terrorize the city, as we mentioned before, only to save it himself. If the Incredibles were not around to expose his true intentions, he likely would have succeeded. The public, already disillusioned by superheroes, would have embraced Syndrome as a new type of hero, a non-superpowered individual using technology. This could have reinforced the belief that superheroes weren't necessary or even dangerous. If the Incredibles remained in hiding and Syndrome continued with his plan, the world may have permanently shifted away from needing real superheroes and turned against natural powers. Instead, regular people with advanced technology would have stepped into the roles that the superheroes played, and we wouldn't really need supers anymore. Man, this is really making Iron Man and Batman look bad here, and that is not my intention, because I love them. And another thing that wouldn't have changed was the government's viewpoint. The only reason the government had changed their opinion on the Incredibles and supers in general was because the Incredibles came out of hiding to defeat Syndrome. Which also leads me to, without superheroes, society is vulnerable, especially to threats that, you know, regular law enforcement and military couldn't handle. I mean, how many times have we seen in a superhero movie that there's like this crazy villain that like no one can defeat besides the superhero? If an alien crashed down that is as big as Godzilla and we don't have a Superman to fight it, I mean, let's be honest, we're all dead. And while Syndrome's technology might offer like a temporary solution to these problems, it wouldn't really provide the same level of protection that a natural superhero would. I mean, someone as indestructible as like Superman or even Mr. Incredible is often a lot times better than the counterpart of Iron Man. I mean, I always thought it was weird when I saw Batman fighting aliens. Like what? Society would have adapted to a world without the Incredibles, but at a cost. The ban on superheroes would have likely stayed in place, and people would have looked to technology and individuals like Syndrome to protect them from extraterrestrial threats. Really, they would have lost the true essence of what a hero really meant. Over time, the lack of the Incredibles and the superheroes might have led to a society that was more cynical, technologically dependent. Wow, I couldn't get that out of my mouth. And lacking in genuine heroism and inspiration. And there it is, the mic drop. So were the Incredibles needed? Of course they were. If the Incredibles weren't the ones to change the way things were running, Syndrome would have succeeded. And honestly, at the end of the day, probably would have got destroyed by some giant lizard man that stomps around the city. In conclusion, without the Incredibles, the world would have sucked.